You know, when we read this during the liturgy part of the service, you know, the V'ahavta, which says, and you shall love Yahweh your Elohim with what? With all your heart. And so we know that there's a requirement that we do something very important, loving the creator of the universe with all of our heart. So this heart thing is important. This is the first place that we find an instruction to love Yahweh, believe it or not, and it's to be with all our heart. So this is what we find in Deuteronomy 6 and in verse 5 where we see that. And so, I wrote in my notes here, isn't it interesting that there is no instruction recorded prior to this that expresses that we are required to love him? So it waited until actually Deuteronomy to actually find that we are to do this. And I think we can see that there's a reason for that is because up to this point, they'd not been doing that very well. The people that he created, that have existed on the planet up until Deuteronomy, have not really, as a whole, or even in much of a small part, really loved him with all their hearts. In Jeremiah 17, we're told in verse 9 that the heart is crooked above all and desperately sick. Who shall know it? So that was one of our foundational verses to start this whole teaching 27 parts ago. You know, in verse 10 of that section in Jeremiah 17, it also says, I, Yahweh, search the heart, and I try the kidneys. And so this is a phrase, by the way, that pops up many, many, many times in Scripture, and it will come up a lot in Jeremiah, this idea that he tests and proves, which should remind us back to Deuteronomy 6, where he says, Deuteronomy 8, where he says that he puts us here on the, through our wilderness walk to test us, to prove whether it's in our heart, whether we're going to keep his commandments, or whether it's in our heart to do it, whether we have the heart to do it. See, it's not about mechanically doing things. He wants you to want to do it because why? Because you realize that it works, that it's the best answer, the best way, the best solution, the best process. To acknowledge that he actually knows better than you. You know what? Father knows best. We're not talking about the TV show. Father knows best. If you'd only believe that and trust that and walk in it, you'd be a whole lot happier. And life would work a whole lot better and simpler. Father knows best. But that's a hard issue because you still think you know best. We've talked about the process, and this is the process in life. Ready? We think, we have an idea or a thought or something comes into our mind. If we meditate on it, and that doesn't mean just like or something. It means if you think about it over time, on a regular basis, it eventually ends up in your heart where your emotions attach to it. Now it becomes emotionally connected. Once it becomes emotionally connected, if it hasn't already, it will now manifest as an action. Sometimes that process happens almost instantly. Thought, emotion, action. Sometimes it takes a lot of time. You think about something, emotions get, and then the action takes place over time. But thought, once it's attached with emotion, if it's held on to long enough, eventually manifests action. That's why the scriptures talks about, and this is in a lot of the parts we've read up to this point, it says that he wants us to lay up in our heart his Torah. We have to lay it up in our heart because if it's in our heart and the right emotions get attached to it, we will manifest the actions of Torah observance. Even Yeshua says in Matthew 12, he says the mouth speaks from the overflow of what? The heart. Because what goes in is what comes out. So the thoughts that end up getting caught up in emotion and we end up keeping it and holding it in this place called the heart, that's the reservoir from which we speak. It's also the reservoir from which we act. And Yirmiyahu was trying to warn them and say, if you would just do this, you wouldn't have to be done, you could stay in the land. But their heart was not ready, not willing. There was a problem with their heart. So I want us to then look at this from an allegorical and a hinted at, a remez, and a drashic sort of way, saying that this is hinting at for us as well. When clearly it's very specifically for them, but if the shoe fits, then we ought to wear it and then figure out we ought to be listening to the same counsel Jeremiah is giving them as taking it for ourselves. Does that make sense? It's not just him telling you in Deuteronomy, if you obey, you get all this wonderful stuff. And if you disobey, this is going to happen. Well, guess what? They obeyed at times and there was wonderful stuff. And they disobeyed and the curses came. We get to see that Abba means what he says. This is one of the greatest challenges, period, in that we could just talk probably the whole day if we wanted on this one verse. Think about it. He said, not just that they didn't turn to me with all their heart, they returned to me with a false heart, but falsely. In other words, they turned to me and decided how they would turn to me. They turned to me, and they spun it to claim they're turning to me when they're really not turning to me. Do you not see this still today? People deciding, oh, I believe in Yahweh, but then look at what they're doing. There are going to be some places in Jeremiah, I don't know about other places, but I'm just saying in Yirmiyahu, in Jeremiah, we're going to see places where Yahweh talks about his heart. His heart. He says, according to my heart. By Jewish traditional understanding, the Torah is the heart of Yahweh. So now what he says here, he says, I shall give you shepherds according to my heart. So now he's saying, look, not the shepherds that you wanted, not the shepherds that are according to what your desires were, not the ones that were going to tickle your ears. I'm going to give you shepherds according to my heart, and they shall feed you with knowledge and understanding. Because guess what? You would think, well, it was obvious when it was Moses, or it was obvious when did you see all the rebelliousness that was going on there? It wasn't obvious to them. Not all of them. You think it's obvious now because you know who he is. You read all about it. You know everything that Moses did, or Yirmiyahu said, and Isaiah and Jeremiah, all these guys, right? Oh, but to the people back then? Were people just all excited to listen to Jeremiah? No. That poor man lived a life that was brutal. He says, oh, but truly delusion comes from the high hills. You know where the high hills are? I'm guessing, this doesn't mean that this is literal here. How about up here? The delusion comes from the highest point in you, your head. That's what the delusion, the high hills. He's talking about the top, the top of you, the head. They would not feel the shame. There was no shame. And all of us know people today that we walk around going, man, they have no shame. But sometimes your father looks down at you from heaven and says, do you have any shame? Do you have no shame to do what you do and claim you're of me? You want the world to get it? You don't have to go out there and knock on their doors. You have to just live it. And then people will see it, and then they'll boast in him. You don't have to go knock on their doors and wake them up. You don't have to grab them in the shopping aisle, on the way to the checkout counter in the store. You don't have to do that to people. He may lead someone to you, that's different. But he says, if you're doing all of this, he says, the nations shall bless themselves in him, and they shall boast in him because they're going to see what he did with you. Yahweh just called them stupid and foolish. And you know what? What they did was stupid and foolish. But we can't judge that because guess what? There's stuff you're doing that's stupid and foolish. So when are we going to stop being stupid and foolish? Well, you know when? When we actually know him. We have to become like him and transform and conform into his image, and we do that by transforming our heart.